Whether it's their only choice or a misguided belief system, sometimes our favorite heroes have to go evil on us, and it happens more often than you may think. We're used to Cyclops being a pretty grounded and proudly good-natured member of the X-Men. But when Cable brings news to the X-Men that he sees the end of the world in their future, Cyclops is convinced that he has to pit himself against the Avengers. There is a huge debate online about whether or not Cyclops is in the wrong in Avengers vs. X-Men, so in some people's minds, he doesn't actually go evil during this storyline. However, considering he's normally aligned with the Avengers, this is a moment where Cyclops' allegiances change, and many of the good guys see it as a turn to the dark side. And later on in this storyline, Phoenix Force takes over Cyclops and he kills Professor X, which is a pretty clear act of evil, but I digress, it's the Phoenix Force. That's just what it does. At number 9 is when Angel goes evil. Angel was always my favorite of the X-Men, and he doesn't get brought up too often on this channel. So, here we are. Everything starts going downhill for Warren Worthington when his wings are amputated in an attempt to save his life. When this happens, Angel goes into a deep depression, having lost his primary source of power, flight. But good thing he's got a jet, so he takes off to try and feel that sweet, sweet air once more. But of course, he can't even have that. The jet is sabotaged by Cameron Hodge and it explodes. Everyone thinks Angel dies here, but he's actually teleported away and saved by Apocalypse. This is where he goes bad. And yes, it's because he's brainwashed, sort of, but it could also be argued that Angel had a lot of anger built up that made him susceptible to this transformation, due to the whole wings clipping thing. Either way, DM me and let me know if you agree or not. At number 8, we've got Reed Richards turning into the Maker. This turn to the dark side takes place in the Ultimate Universe, where the superheroes are sort of more serious, gritty versions of themselves. And when Reed proposes to Sue Storm and is rejected, he gets pretty close to the edge. But when Kang comes from the future and tells Reed that he's the only one who can save the Ultimate Universe, he makes it his duty to do some pretty nasty stuff, including killing his own family and faking his own death. And when the heroes catch on to this, they naturally take him out by throwing him into the negative zone. But when the Ultimates, the Avengers of this universe, realize the prophecy is true, they turn to Reed to save the universe. And, spoiler alert, they find out that it wasn't Reed, but Reed and Sue's son Franklin who would have to be the key to saving the universe. But Franklin was never born, because Sue rejected Reed. So boom goes that universe. Sad. Okay, at number 7 we have Bucky Barnes. Harkening back to World War II, Captain America and Bucky Barnes are teammates on the battlefield, zeroing in on Nazi scientist Baron Heinrich Zemo. But they're knocked unconscious in a battle with Zemo, and they're awakened just in time to try and catch up to a stolen ally plane that's taking off. As they catch up to it, only Bucky is able to hold on as it flies away, and Cap falls into the English Channel. But lucky for him, because the plane explodes, seemingly killing Bucky. But he isn't actually killed. After this, Bucky is fished out of the water by the Soviets with one arm missing. He's indoctrinated to hate the West and turned into the Winter Soldier. This is done all against his will, and he has no recollection of his old self and his prior allegiances, so it's not really his fault, but he goes evil nonetheless. At number 6 is Jean Grey turning into Dark Phoenix. This is probably one of the earliest examples of a superhero going bad that I can remember witnessing as a kid. Although this is an instance of Phoenix Force basically brainwashing Jean, I figured it would be blasphemy to leave Dark Phoenix off the list. Jean Grey is an extremely powerful telepath that exceeds all of Professor X's expectations, so when she is consumed by Phoenix Force, she becomes one of the most powerful and unstoppable forces in all of the cosmos. She traverses galaxies, absorbing energy from stars as she goes, and in turn takes out masses of life on various planets in what can only be described as super selfish of her. Throughout her time as Dark Phoenix, she has no recollection of her former self or even a proper sense of reality, so it's not really Jean Grey anymore, but something much more sinister. At number 5 we have Superboy Prime. This is one of the most significant cases of a superhero going evil because the cost of this turn is one of the most significant in any comic storyline, Marvel, DC, or otherwise. Superboy Prime is born on Earth Prime in the same way as Superman, landing in a cornfield, being named Clark, all that hubbub. Except Earth Prime is part of a dimension that doesn't have any superheroes in it. except for Superboy. He's the only one. And when a multiversal catastrophe takes place that destroys hundreds of different worlds, Superboy teams up with a group of superheroes to try and save as many as they can. Basically, as you can guess, his homeworld, Earth Prime, is not saved in this process. And even during another process where they're able to create an Earth with an amalgam of 5 different Earth's histories, Superboy's is not one of those 5 either. So, to keep the story short, this basically drives Superboy into a jealous rage that he never really gets out of. It's a really sad story actually, and given Superboy Prime's insane level of power, it causes immeasurable harm to the cosmos for years after. At number 4, we've got Captain America. Now, there are a couple events that can be explored where Captain America changes sides, one of which being Civil War and the other being Secret Empire. The Civil War example is much like Cyclops' case, where he doesn't clearly go evil, but he does actively decide to take a stance against his former allies. The Secret Empire storyline, however, shows him definitely going to the dark side, but this isn't actually him, but a sleeper agent with allegiances to Hydra. For the purposes of this list, the Civil War example seems to fit better because it's a stance Cap feels like he needs to take for what, as he sees, the greater good. But it still isn't that evil. All I know is that when Cap mutters "Hail Hydra," it leaves a much more sinister taste in our mouths than him taking a stance against the Sokovia Accord. But let me know over on Instagram which one you think is a more legitimate turn to the dark side for Captain America. At number 3, it is Jason Todd. This is a classic tale of betrayal from the world of DC Comics. Jason Todd is introduced as Robin to Batman and spends years by his side. But during one fateful encounter with the Joker, Jason is captured and held in a warehouse where he is beaten with a crowbar until he's near death. Jason and his own mother blown up in a massive explosion at the hand of Joker. This Robin is basically presumed dead. Then, years later, when a mysterious character donning the moniker of Red Hood comes around, Batman and others soon learn that it is in fact, yes, Jason Todd, but he's not quite himself. Now in the retcon storyline, it's explained that Jason is found by Talia al Ghul and revived in the Lazarus Pit, leaving him in a coma for a year or so and his memory wiped. But he does hold on to a resentment that he was left behind by his former partner Batman and replaced without too much concern, and without any revenge being taken against the Joker. So there's something here that is often argued as being part of Jason Todd's motivation to become Red Hood and turn against Batman. Alright, at number 2 we have Scarlet Witch. First introduced as what appears to be a villain, Scarlet Witch is revealed to actually be good, and she joins the Avengers. Even though she does become one of the most powerful of the group, it may have been a mistake for her new allies to trust her perceived goodness so openly. It's not that she was faking it, but considering what ends up taking place, it could be argued that there was a decent amount of evil hiding right underneath the surface. During the event Avengers Disassembled, Wanda loses all her cool when she learns that her 2 sons are parts of the Devil's Soul. This, naturally, enrages her and she takes it out on the Avengers. And she doesn't pull her punches either, actually killing Hawkeye, Vision, and Scott Lang. Finally, at number 1, we have the one we all know, Superman's turn to evil in the Injustice storyline. This is a pretty popular event and very significant as well, involving such a powerful hero as Superman, so I figured it needed to be put at number 1. For those who don't know, this turn that Superman takes is a result of him being tricked into killing Lois Lane and destroying all of Metropolis with a nuclear bomb. Yikes. It's Joker's final trick, and it's a doozy because it is enough to turn Superman against his own philosophies and resort to killing as a means of justice. He starts by taking out Joker there and then, but continues his reign of evil by recruiting other heroes to join him on his path of destruction. What makes this turn so crazy and memorable is that Superman isn't entranced by any otherworldly possession or under the spell of some kind of enchantment. He himself has justified his own evil actions. He truly feels in this moment, and forevermore, that he has no choice but to become evil.
Coming in at number 10, we have the famous Scott Summers of the X-Men, aka Cyclops. For years best known as the leader of the X-Men that has to rely on a visor made of ruby to control the concussive blasts constantly shooting from his eyes, Cyclops eventually found himself at a breaking point after years of family-related trauma, Marvel's most infamous love triangle, and the constant stress of mutant kind constantly being attacked and hated by humanity. When mutants became an endangered species following the events of M-Day, Cyclops began to lead the X-Men in a more extremist direction, and following a conflict with the Avengers over the imminent arrival of the Phoenix Force, Cyclops lost control and wound up killing his beloved mentor, Professor X. And while it can be argued that eventually Cyclops' actions led to a better future for mutants, with Professor X and most mutants now enjoying the benefits of resurrection on the island of Krakoa, nearly wiping out the entire Avengers team along with your own father figure was definitely a dark turn for the guy named Cyclops. Coming in at number 9, we've got another member of the X-Men with Angel. One of the earliest members of the team and enabled with the ability to fly due to the feathery wings on his back, Angel was unfortunately wounded and had to have his wings removed after being attacked by the evil mutant named Harpoon. Traumatized by this turn of events, Angel was manipulated by the villain Apocalypse into agreeing to serve as one of his 4 horsemen in exchange for having his wings returned. Now known as Archangel, the Horseman of Death, he fought against the X-Men until he was finally able to be knocked back to his senses by the actions of Iceman. And hey, what are friends for if not bringing you back from the edge of being an accomplice to superpowered genocide? Coming in at number 8, we have Iron Man, aka Tony Stark. And no, I promise I'm not just talking from Cap's perspective in Civil War, although honestly, Tony did some messed up stuff in that event too. No, what I'm talking about is during an event in the 90s when a variant of the time-traveling villain Kang the Conqueror, known as Immortus, began using the neural link in the Iron Man suit to secretly begin altering Tony Stark's brainwaves. Over time, Tony's morals were slowly eroded until he was an active threat to the rest of the Avengers team, and was only able to be defeated with the help of his own heroic teenage self from the past. And while eventually, through comic book magic, Tony Stark would be returned to his usual status quo, this is still an intense example of just how dangerous an armed billionaire like Iron Man could be without any morals holding him back. Coming in at number 7, we have Sinestro. While he may be best known these days as the arch-enemy of the Green Lanterns, in particular Hal Jordan, Sinestro's origins were a lot more heroic than you'd expect. Sinestro actually used to be one of the most respected members of the Green Lantern Corps, until his overseers began to notice that his sector of space was becoming more and more of a dictatorship, with Sinestro having absolute control over all the citizens he was supposed to be protecting. While he had good intentions to keep the peace, Sinestro was stripped of his green power ring, and in his rage formed the Yellow Lantern Corps to fight back against the group that he believed fundamentally wronged him. Coming in at number 6, we have the Plutonian. Hailing from the independent comic book series Irredeemable, published by Boom Studios, the Plutonian was a what if Superman started killing everyone story years before that premise became oversaturated with projects like Brightburn, The Boys, and the Injustice games. After spending years as the most beloved but mysterious superhero on the planet, the Plutonian loses his mind from the stress of his job and begins a war against the rest of his superpowered brethren by destroying a city of 7 million people. Most of this entire series is about different characters struggling to stay one step ahead of the Plutonian's killing spree, and if you're in the mood for a dark, nearly 40-issue run with a surprisingly interesting ending, I would definitely recommend it. Coming in at number 5, we have Hal Jordan, aka the Green Lantern. The 90s were an interesting time in comics, as the medium continued to mature and tell darker stories after starting along that trend in the 80s, and it led to the attempted reinvention of multiple heroes. And just like Iron Man, Hal Jordan is someone who is taken in a more villainous direction. Following the destruction of his hometown of Coast City, Hal Jordan went mad with grief and killed multiple other Green Lanterns in an attempt to increase his own power. Dubbing himself the new name of Parallax, these rash actions would eventually be justified as being caused by a fear parasite of the same name, but for a time, Hal Jordan was one of the biggest cosmic threats in the entire DC universe. Coming in at number 4, we have Ozymandias from Watchmen. Serving for years as one of the most popular vigilantes in America, Ozymandias, or Adrian Veidt, eventually came to believe that something more drastic than heroics was needed to truly save the world. For that twisted reason, he faked an alien invasion against the world that resulted in millions of deaths to unite America and the USSR against a common foe. To do this, he needed to manipulate Dr. Manhattan, the most powerful being in the universe, into believing he should leave Earth, as to not interfere with Ozymandias' plans. And by the time anyone realized just how far their former ally had fallen and what he planned to do, he'd already done it 35 minutes ago. Coming in at number 3, we have Jean Grey, aka the Dark Phoenix. An X-Men storyline and character turn so iconic that they've tried turning it into a movie on 2 separate occasions, Jean Grey has long been one of the ideal hosts for the Phoenix Force, a fiery power that's one of the oldest in the entire Marvel universe. And while she was originally able to contain all of this power and still use it for heroics, eventually Jean was corrupted by it, becoming the Dark Phoenix and wiping out the planet of Dabari 4, ending 5 billion lives in the process. And while it could be argued this is more the Phoenix Force's doing than Jean's, you can still expect to get some suspicious glances if your powers wound up blowing up a planet. Coming in at number 2, we have the Scarlet Witch, also known as Wanda Maximoff. Originally believing herself to be the mutant daughter of Magneto, Wanda is in reality one of the most powerful magic wielders in the Marvel multiverse, and a conduit for chaos magic that allows her to rewrite reality to her will. And after years of being unsure of her own identity and the loss of her children to the demon Mephisto, Wanda finally snapped and used her reality-changing powers to declare no more mutants, kicking off a brand new era for the X-Men as she single-handedly ensured that mutants became an endangered species. Wouldn't it just be nicer to put everyone in a 1950s sitcom again? And finally, coming in at our top spot, we have the Ultimate Universe version of Reed Richards. While the mainstream Marvel Universe's version of Mr. Fantastic has consistently been a hero and inspiration to the rest of the world, his Ultimate Universe counterpart couldn't be more tragically different. Isolated with his thoughts after the disbandment of the Fantastic Four, Reed became obsessed with preventing the destruction of the Ultimate Universe, and eventually became the villainous Maker, willing to do whatever it takes to ensure his universe's survival, even if it meant the complete destruction of the rest of the multiverse. Unlike many other iconic heroes on this list, this version of Reed Richards has yet to become a good guy again, and remains an active threat throughout the multiverse that will surely come up against the real Fantastic Four again in the future.
Number 10, Captain America. When Steve Rogers said "Hail Hydra" at the end of Captain America Steve Rogers #1 in 2016, comic books exploded. Not only did this shock everyone, but it made critics furious. Later on, it revealed that at one point Captain America had been transformed back into a young man again, but this whole restoration was orchestrated by Red Skull. So while restoring him to a younger man, he also changed the timeline to make Cap a sleeper agent for Hydra, planting seeds for their takeover throughout history. Seeing such a textbook hero and soldier be turned into a Nazi was something no reader was expecting. It made such an impact on how people viewed Cap, and even Avengers Endgame made a reference to it. When Cap needs the scepter from New York in 2012, he has to pretend to be a member of Hydra, since he knows that everyone else essentially is. No matter what you think, it was a good scene in both the comics and the movie, but it was an altered timeline that had been reset, so it only slightly counts, hence why it's at number 10. Number 9, Scarlet Witch. This child of Magneto has been in the comics for several years, and is a villain turned hero, starting off working for her father, but later joining up with the Avengers alongside her brother Quicksilver in order to seek redemption. This was the case for a while. However, after the death of her 2 sons, Scarlet Witch had a nervous breakdown and used chaos magic to orchestrate multiple attacks that appeared to come from other villains. These attacks ended up destroying the Avengers, killing Ant-Man, Hawkeye, and Vision. Shortly after this, she fell into an unstable state. However, Quicksilver was able to persuade her to create the House of M alternate reality, which began in June of 2005, and even replaced the main 616 universe for a time, until it was reverted. After things went back to the way they were, it was said that the events of House of M took place on Earth 58163. Number 8, Cyclops. When Marvel tried to make Scott Summers more interesting by assassinating him, some readers began growing concerned with the character. After he had mourned the loss of
Jean Grey, he got married to another woman and had a son who would later become Cable. But when Scott learned that Jean was alive, he ran out on his family to be with her. Years later, in order to save his son's life, Scott merged with Apocalypse, and this would change Scott forever. After he was restored, he distanced himself from his new wife Jean and began a psychic affair with Emma Frost. He also started down a road towards extremist mutant views. When Jean died again, he kept his relationship with Emma going, and when the past sins of Professor X were revealed, Scott made the professor leave the school. Eventually, Scott was possessed by the Phoenix Force, which caused him to kill Professor X and remake the world into a totalitarian state. While we love a good guy, Baddie Scott is definitely an interesting character, and I would love to see this explored more on the big screen. Number 7. Sinestro. Now, some people think that Sinestro has always been the villain, but this is not the case. You'll also know this if you've seen the wonderful Ryan Reynolds Green Lantern movie. Mwah. Long before Hal Jordan fell into Parallax's uber-villain grasp, Sinestro took the trip from being Green Lantern to Yellow. Being from planet Karugar, Sinestro's hunger for protecting his world and keeping peace turned into a dictatorship of absolute order. This all happened while he was still a Green Lantern. When the Corps found out, he was stripped of his ring and sent into the antimatter universe, where he got a yellow ring based on the power of fear. He's been Hal's arch nemesis ever since. Eventually, Sinestro created his own Power Ring Corps, which included Parallax, the Anti-Monitor, Cyborg, Superman, and Superboy Prime. Other colors popped up in the emotional spectrum, and this is what caused the Blackest Night War. Sinestro is one of the few heroes who have gone bad and not returned. Number 6. Superwoman. Superwoman from Earth 3 is Lois Lane as an Amazon. She is a member of the crime syndicate, and I've talked about her before, so oh my does she have quite the resume. She had a dysfunctional relationship with Ultraman, an affair with Owlman, and another affair with Alexander Luthor, the crime syndicate's greatest enemy and Earth 3's hero. She even had a kid with him too, not to mention her lasso of not truth, yes, submission. She also posed for some provocative photos for James Olsen in exchange for him doing her favors. Based on the pictures, I don't want to know what kind of favors they were. Evil ones, in all honesty. She is kicking all kinds of ass and apparently taking pics of it too. And if you're maybe slightly too much, bam, you got a lasso of submission around your neck and you're asking for more. In all honesty, I prefer this version of Superwoman, and I'm hoping for more stories surrounding her and the crime syndicate as a whole. Halfway through, and at number 5, Robin. When Jason Todd died in the comics, it was considered to be one of the few comic book deaths that stuck around and that mattered, having a great impact on Batman and his superheroing as a whole. But when he was brought back as a supervillain, that's when things got interesting and kind of ridiculous. After this, it seemed like no death in comics was permanent, and now I am honestly skeptical of every death I see in TV shows or comics, or movies, since eventually they'll just be brought back. But as Red Hood, the character of Jason Todd, found his calling. Red Hood is such a good character, especially contrasting with his Robin persona, and that mask is pretty badass, let's be honest. When Joker also used the Red Hood name, it was weird in my personal opinion, but that Jason Todd version, mwah. Number 4, the Hulk. Maestro is an alternate future version of Hulk from the Hulk Future Imperfect story arc. This version of Hulk is stronger, more experienced, and much more ruthless than the version we know. After Earth is torn apart by nuclear war, the Hulk's powers get amplified because of all the radiation in the atmosphere, so he unites the world and rules under an iron fist. Modern day Hulk gets transported to the future because reasons, and sees what can happen if he gives into his inner rage. Him and Maestro instantly go to war, and Hulk had to defeat Maestro by sending him back to the time when the gamma bomb that gave him their powers had first exploded. That wiped Maestro out on the subatomic scale. No regenerating from that one. Seeing what Bruce is capable of, it was really shocking, and honestly made me think about how much this current Hulk must be holding back, and how seeing that could shape the Hulk to be better than himself. So beautiful. Number 3, Ozymandias. Ozymandias is also referred to as the smartest man in the world. He is one of the 2 main antagonists of the Watchmen comic book series, and one of the main protagonists of its sequel in 2017, Doomsday Clock. He is a former superhero turned billionaire, industrialist, and CEO. He secretly concocts a plan to unite the world and prevent World War III by killing millions of people through a fake alien invasion he planned to stage. His plan fails, obviously, because it's complicated as hell, and he shifts to searching for Dr. Manhattan in order to save the world. While his plan is complicated and convoluted, Ozymandias as a villain is far more interesting than him as a hero. Smart villains are always a thrill, unless they literally know every possible universe, so seeing him as a villain is really something to watch, man. If you weren't mad at me for number 10, here's number 2. Number 2, Batman. Batman has always been seen as the hero, fighting the criminals of Gotham and doing his best to rid it of crime. And when Batman was created, this was seen as a good way to fight crime, by actually fighting it. However, in recent years, society has started to see vigilante justice as dangerous and sometimes as insane as the criminals you're fighting. In this limited run published monthly starting on October 4th, 2017, Sean Murphy wanted to depict Gotham as an actual city with real world problems. And the way Batman fights crime won't work with movements like Black Lives Matter and the growing wage gap. So Batman is treated like the villain. Who is the hero, you ask? Well, a Joker who has been cured of his insanity and becomes a politician. While seeing the roles reversed is definitely interesting, there have also been Batman who were just straight up evil, my favorite being Red Death. But it's actually awesome to see a character who has been around for so long be depicted as a villain. Number 1. Carol Danvers. Captain Marvel hasn't always gotten the most appreciation from fans, especially recently. The latest issue of her comics, Captain Marvel number 8, shipped only 32,939 units in July according to Comicron. So the writers knew they had to do something bold to bring up sales again. And after a whistleblower at Disney reportedly said they cooked some books on her movie, they needed to do something big. Captain Marvel has fought aliens, saved the world, punched Thanos in the face, and rescued X-Men. So what's next? Killing the Avengers. In Captain Marvel number 12, a story arc will start called The Last Avenger, in which Carol will set out on a mission to kill all the Avengers. What would cause one of the world's most powerful heroes to go dark? What is her plan? Is this all a ruse, or is there some other driving force behind her massive 180? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.
At number 10, we have Bucky Barnes. This one is one that I think we're all familiar with if you've been watching the Marvel movies and, really into that, like myself, who's seen all of them. Anyways, Bucky starts off as a supportive best friend to Captain America. Then he dies, and it's a huge shock when we find out later that he's actually alive. But when the Captain and Bucky meet again, he is now the Winter Soldier. Hydra, of course, is behind this, and they wipe his memory. They give him this epic metal arm that's super strong and super cool, and then they keep him in suspended animation in between his evil missions so that he can't figure anything out. Of course, we know how that ends if we've watched the movies. Check them out if you haven't. Number 9 is Cyclops. You may also know him as Scott Summers, also known as Dreamy James Marsden. So cute. He was part of X-Men, he went to the school, he joined the team, he fought for good, but then after the death of the beloved Jean Grey, he just was never really the same. And it gets kind of more so soap opera-y, I'd say, for a bit. Like, he remarries, but then he hears that Jean might still be alive, so he just bails on his family, like child and all, he's just out. And then he begins having this psychic affair with Emma Frost also on the side, so he's kind of a dick, in my opinion. But after a lot of other strikes that are much more important than cheating and stuff in this world, he gets kicked out of X-Men. Then he's possessed by Phoenix Force, he kills Xavier, and he starts remaking the world into this totalitarian state. Like, whoa, that escalated quickly. Really not where I saw this sort of boy next door looking guy going. So his character gets really dark. I guess they had to kind of amp it up because he was just so like shreddies and cornflakes and all that. At number 8, we have Daredevil. So this blind vigilante from New York has always struggled with toting the line between good and evil, trying not to kill people because it's not great, that sort of thing. In one of the stories, he takes over the Hand Ninja clan and starts training them, but in the process, he gets possessed by the demonic entity known as the Beast of the Hand and becomes more and more extreme. He gets so evil, he even kills his longtime adversary, Bullseye. Eventually, other heroes start to realize that he's possessed, and then they get him back to the usual Daredevil. This is definitely a common theme, good guys getting possessed. Number 7 is Iron Man. I know, I was shocked too, but if you think about it, he is super dependent on technology and his suit and all that, so this bad guy named Immortus realizes this and he discovers a weakness in the neural link between Stark and his Iron Man suit. So Immortus then begins manipulating Tony's psyche, having the Avengers do his evil biddings. At first it's just little things, but then it gets really dark. Tony eventually murders like 3 allies of the Avengers and likely would have kept on doing it, but his teammates realize that something's up and are able to snap him out. Thank goodness for friends. At number 6, we have Angel, who later becomes Archangel. So he's one of the original 5 X-Men who eventually joins X-Force. During the Mutant Massacre, an evil mutant named Harpoon cripples his wings by impaling each wing crucifix style. Whoa, wild. Crucifixion was happening to the wings and it was very upsetting. Later, they get infected, they have to be amputated, and everyone thinks he's dead, but it turns out he was transported by this super powerful villain named Apocalypse elsewhere. As you can imagine, he takes losing his wings, his only power, really badly. He's in a dark place when Apocalypse offers to give him new wings if he becomes Death, one of his 4 horsemen, and this dark place makes him want to agree. But then he gets these metallic wings and they have these razor sharp feathers. Love this. And then he just has this need for violence. So he becomes even more formidable to the X-Men because he used to be one of them. So he knows all their tactics, he knows their weaknesses. So as you can imagine, epic fights ensue. Number 5 is the Hulk. I mean, he's always had trouble with rage, so it's sort of a no-brainer that at some point he gets super evil. It's kind of his thing. He turns into a sadistic dictator in not only 1, but 2 alternate futures. I'll tell you about one of them. The Hulk figures out a way to fully take over Bruce Banner's mind. He becomes more and more evil, eventually killing other superheroes, and then for some reason takes over the state of California. He becomes the ruler there, takes his cousin, the She-Hulk, as his bride. It gets weird, it gets messed up. Dark times, dark times. Green Lantern comes in at number 4. I know, boo his terrible movie. It was awful, but can we respect Ryan Reynolds, tip our hats a bit for calling that out in Deadpool 2 and wishing that he never made it? I love that so much. What a wonderful man. Things take a twist in his life with the destruction of Coast City and everybody in it. So he's just gutted and in grief, and then he snaps. He goes really crazy, does a bunch of things, then goes to Oa and drains all the energy from the central battery and becomes the villain Parallax. Then he goes on a rampage, trying to basically change the universe into his own image. Needless to say, a lot of DC heroes have to get involved and step in to try to put him down. At number 3, we have Venom. I mean, this guy really flip-flops a lot. It's almost like he was bad, then he was good, then he was bad. So it's not a huge surprise he's on our list. He's gone up against Spider-Man for many years. He taunts him, he threatens his loved ones, he's just super evil and awful. But once he has offspring, once he becomes a daddy, it starts to appear that he just has a little bit more of a conscience. So he sort of is the opposite almost of this. So when Carnage starts to appear, like we saw in the movie, he really starts to align himself more with the good guys, but then ends up bonded with this low-level thug, namely Price, and then that just makes him all crazy again. So he flip-flops a lot of times and sort of is an interesting anti-hero, I think. Number 2 on our list is Superman. Oh man, you just knew this was gonna happen. I mean, he's so powerful. In the Injustice universe, we got to see what would happen if Superman was just pushed a little too far. The Joker is insane, so he comes up with this huge plan. He gasses Superman, so he thinks that he's fighting Doomsday, but it turns out it's actually Lois Lane, who's pregnant with his baby at the time. Then Joker ties a nuclear bomb to Metropolis to Lois Lane's heart. Whoa, dark. How do you even come up with this? So Lois Lane dies, Superman City is gone, his soul is crushed, and it pushes him too far. I think that's totally fair, and his old rules are just gone. So he puts his fist through Joker's chest. Yeah, Joker's chest. As you can imagine, Batman's pretty horrified, so he kind of starts distancing himself because he's like, whoa, you're super dark, man. Obviously not in those exact words. But then Superman starts really taking over the League, he turns into the regime, which then starts using violence throughout the world to enforce what he thinks is right. So of course, again, they have to try to take him out. And then finally at number 1, we have Jean Grey, or the Phoenix. I mean, she was definitely the one that first jumped into my mind. I don't know about you guys. We've seen in the movies, for sure, and just sort of scratched the surface, I think, about how far she goes. Full disclosure though, I did not see the most recent movie. It had such bad reviews that I just couldn't bring myself to do it, but I'm waiting for an airplane ride to maybe give it a go. After a mission in space, she gets exposed to a lot of radiation and almost dies. The Phoenix Force feels her psychic cry and takes her form. Now that she has all this power, Jean has a really hard time dealing with this increased power, and is also at the same time manipulated by a mutant called Mastermind. Long story short, she destroys a star, she kills a whole civilization, and just gets downright evil. So that's why she's my number 1.
Starting us off in at number 10, Nick Fury. 2 words. Original Sin. That's the title of the story event in which Marvel fans everywhere were shocked to discover that Nick Fury wasn't as noble as we all thought he was. Let's backtrack a second though. Nick Fury, at least the more contemporary version of the character, is largely associated with espionage. As the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., there's a certain level of secrecy constantly surrounding his work, an image that was further perpetuated by his appearance in the MCU. Now, Original Sin saw Nick Fury as the man responsible for the murder of the Watcher, and had his eyes taken out, becoming his replacement, called the Unseen. The story arc is continuously panned by fans for being one of Marvel's most disliked events in recent history. In at number 9, Scarlet Witch. Scarlet Witch often finds herself on lists like these, in which she's stated as untrustworthy because of her history. Sure, she has had her struggles with mental health in the comics, and sure, she killed a bunch of Avengers once because she was having a severe mental breakdown, and yes, she did alter the fabric of reality and removed almost all of the mutant population's powers. And of course, there are all reasons for other heroes to be wary of her at times. That being said though, she's also one of the most powerful members of the Avengers and has proven herself to be a valuable ally. So she still finds herself on our list because of her history, but of course, take that with a grain of salt. And let's not forget, the MCU version of the character saw herself locked away in the Avengers Tower thanks to Tony Stark, who didn't trust that she could control her powers, and therefore during Captain America Civil War was better off kept away than allowed out and about in public. Kinda harsh, Tony. In at 8, Quicksilver. Unlike his twin sister, Quicksilver is in complete control of his powers and is mentally stable for the most part. He's just a bit of Known for being rather selfish at times, Quicksilver takes after his father Magneto more than Scarlet Witch does. This is something that really took shape though between 1991 and 1993 when Quicksilver was a mainstay in X-Factor. His personality began to take shape as a character who was easily irritated and very arrogant, which writer Peter David would justify as a natural consequence of his powers. Now to Quicksilver, the rest of the world is moving in slow motion, which gets on his nerves, causing him to feel impatient and develop a superiority complex. Of course, this has resulted in him usually acting out of his best interest or the interest of his sister, who often is one of the only individuals that Pietro cares for unconditionally. Otherwise, he's pretty darn selfish. In at number 7, Eric O'Grady. Eric O'Grady is the worst. The character, who was first introduced in Irredeemable Ant-Man issue 1 in 2006, is the third person to take on the Ant-Man mantle, and irredeemable he was. O'Grady's most defining traits were his immoral attitudes and behaviors. The character, who had gotten the Ant-Man suit off of the corpse of his dead friend, would go on and hit on his dead friend's ex-girlfriend and then get her pregnant. He maimed a SHIELD agent with his suit's jets, burning half of this agent's face, resulting in him being deaf and blind on one side of his head. He would also save women that he found attractive solely so he could take them out on dates afterwards, and if he didn't get an invitation back to their place for sex, he would shrink down and follow them into their apartments, peeping on them. He once peeped on Carol Danvers that way. To add insult to injury, he would constantly renounce his ways and claimed that he was working on becoming a proper hero, but never really followed through on those vows to change. Overall, when you've got a superhero who uses their powers to take advantage of others, that is definitely an individual who cannot be trusted. Luckily, he's no longer Ant-Man. In at 6, Wally West. Alright, spoilers abound, friends. We'll be discussing events from the 2018 Heroes in Crisis story arc by Tom King at this number. If you haven't read it and want to, you might want to skip this. Good? We good? Cool. Heroes in Crisis was Tom King's attempt at addressing mental health issues within the superhero community. In it, there is a shooting at Sanctuary, a rehabilitation center for superheroes that was put together by DC's holy trinity of Batman, Wonder Woman, and the Man of Steel. The whole story is a murder mystery, and towards the end, we discover that neither Harley Quinn or Booster Gold, the prime suspects, are responsible, but rather it was Wally West who caused the shooting thanks to his own psychological breakdown, having been dealing with the PTSD of his entire family being wiped from existence, and then discovering the equally complex files of other patients at Sanctuary. He was overwhelmed, and in an attempt to cover up his actions, he ran to the future, murdered his future self, and then brought his corpse back to make it look like he was also a victim of the shooting. Eventually the truth comes out and Wally is locked up in a Justice League prison. While we understand why he did what he did, the character has become quite unreliable because of it. Wonder how long it's gonna take Batman to get over this and be nice to him again. Remember how long it took him to get over Hal Jordan as Parallax? Years, people. Wally's got a long road ahead. Thing is, this isn't the first time Wally has lost the trust of other heroes, but this is definitely by far the biggest instance that has proven that he is untrustworthy. In at number 5, Zatanna. Zatanna may not have been responsible for a mass shooting of superheroes, but she did cover up a rape and tampered with the memories of others. Identity Crisis is a story arc that came out in 2004 and is somewhat of a murder mystery itself. It begins with the death of Sue Dibney, the wife of the Elongated Man, and over the course of the story, it's revealed that Dr. Light once raped Sue at the JLA satellite headquarters. Zatanna, along with Adam, Black Canary, Hawkman, Hal Jordan, and Barry Allen, agreed to mind wipe both of them, which practically lobotomized Dr. Light, turning him into an ineffectual buffoon. It's also revealed that another mind wipe had occurred with their knowledge, with Zatanna mind wiping the members of the Secret Society of Supervillains when they found out their identities. Now, when Batman finds out all of this, he is not cool with it, because of course he's Batman, he wouldn't be. And then we learn that Batman had his mind wiped as well after objecting pointing to the solution. Green Arrow, when confessing to Bruce, also implies that this mind wipe trick has been used in other cases. Now, to be fair, other heroes were also in cahoots with Zatanna, so she didn't act alone. But she was the one who pulled the trigger, so to speak. And fun fact, this story arc was a pivotal point in Batman's history, because from here on out, he became notoriously more paranoid than ever, largely shaping some of the character's behavior that we're familiar with today. I mean, after all that, can you blame him? In at 4, Eros. Star Fox aka Eros is another character on this list whose history of sexual harassment and treatment of those he saves makes him an unreliable individual. In 2005, he was put on trial for sexual assault, accused of using his powers to seduce a woman who was happily married. Jennifer Walters aka She-Hulk is his defense lawyer, with her firm having been contracted by Star Fox's father. Through the course of the story, Jennifer begins to suspect that Star Fox has used his powers on her too, and then he's banned from the courtroom when he begins to use his abilities to alter the witnesses' testimonies. Star Fox's father teleports him back home to Titan, where he receives another trial, and the Living Tribunal, who's clearly been watching this like it's some sort of fascinating soap opera, intervenes and brings Jennifer on as the prosecuting attorney. It's later revealed that Star Fox used his powers on She-Hulk to influence her relationship and marriage to John Jameson. Overall, not cool. And at number 3, Namor. Namor is another case of a character who has always had his best interest at heart, but that should not be surprising. It's been a defining characteristic for Namor since his earliest appearances in the Golden Age. Debuting in 1939, Namor was initially an antagonist created to fight against the then android Human Torch in a clash of fire versus water. But while he began as a villain during World War II, he would join up with the Invaders, a team that consisted of himself, the Human Torch, and Captain America. Largely credited as being the first real anti-hero in comics, Namor often works towards his own personal goals and the goals of Atlantis, which he rules over. In bigger Marvel Universe-wide conflicts, he often chooses the side that is the most beneficial for him. Not to say that he isn't altruistic, but dude just knows what he wants. Moving on to number 2, we have Sentry. Sentry is a character who, in the story that he was introduced in, was established as an unreliable character right from the get-go. And that's not because of any sort of selfish or immoral reason. It is because he has an evil alter ego living inside of him with enough power to be a massive threat to the whole Marvel Universe. This alter ego, known as the Void, is so strong that Sentry himself agreed to have his mind wiped, along with the minds of the rest of the universe, to forget that he ever existed. In 2000, in Sentry issue 1, we learned that Robert Reynolds, his civilian alias, begins to remember being a superhero and remembers his interactions with other heroes. It's later revealed in the series that he worked with Reed Richards and Victor Von Doom to alter everyone's memories as an attempt to keep the Void at bay and prevent it from harming anyone else. It's the ultimate sacrifice, but unfortunately his memory comes back, and so does the Void. And finally, in at number 1, Hank Pym. If you're a fan of our channel, you've probably heard me discuss Hank Pym on numerous occasions. The character, despite being one of Marvel's oldest and a founding member of the Avengers, has had a long history of being impacted by poor mental health and poor writing, and thus has created some of the biggest controversies over the years. Even those unfamiliar with Hank's history have likely heard of Hank Pym wife-beater at some point in time. It's also commonly believed that this history is why Scott Lang was chosen to helm Ant-Man in the MCU. Now, we could be here all day listing off the things that Hank has done that makes him an unreliable superhero. The short of it though, he's responsible for creating Ultron, he became schizophrenic and attacked a foe who had surrendered, he tried to get out of being court-martialed by the Avengers by concocting a scheme that could have put the lives of the Avengers in danger, then he beat Janet when she objected to it. There is so much more than that too. And most recently, Ultron took over his body, essentially used him as a flesh suit, and then messed with the heroes of the 616 yet again. And then Hank got his soul eaten by a demon in the Soul Stone. Hank feels like a character who has been in a vulnerable position for decades and is always taken advantage of, causing more trouble than good. We feel for you, Pym.
In at 10, Captain America. Captain America, who people fondly call Cap, found himself entangled with the group of Hydra, his longtime foe that he had been fighting against for years. This unexpected twist occurred in 2016's Captain America Steve Rogers #1, when Cap uttered the shocking phrase of "Hail Hydra" after callously pushing a fellow ally out of a plane. Prior to this, Cap had experienced a significant transformation. Due to the actions of the Iron Nail, the super soldier serum in Cap's bloodstream was neutralized, causing his body to age, aligning with his actual age of 90 years old. This resulted in him assuming the persona of Old Man Cap, similar to his portrayal in Endgame for a period of time, but eventually a twist unfolded involving the Cosmic Cube known as the Tesseract that was in the movies. However, the Cosmic Cube had taken the form of a 4-year-old girl named Kobik, who had been manipulated by the Red Skull into believing that Hydra was good. When Kobik restored Cap to his youthful and robust physique, she also implanted him with an unwavering loyalty to Hydra. So he wasn't actually evil, he just thought that he was, and it's a whole thing. It still shocked us though, and people were mad about it. And at 9, Superman. In the world of injustice, Superman is driven to extremes by the death of Lois Lane at the hands of the Joker. Superman was manipulated into thinking that Lois was Doomsday. I'm sure you can guess how that went. Which leads him to believe that he must take a more aggressive approach to maintaining law and order in the world. As a result of this, Superman becomes a ruthless dictator, using his immense powers to control and subjugate anyone who opposes him, or just flat out kill them. He is willing to use violence and force to achieve his goals, and he quickly becomes a symbol of fear and oppression, rather than the hope and justice symbol that he was. One of the most interesting aspects of the Injustice version of Superman is the way in which he's portrayed as a tragic figure. Like, while his actions are extreme and villainous, it is clear that he's motivated by a deep sense of loss and grief. However, this does cause him to, become a freaking dictator. I don't think that really justifies it, but it makes him understandable. It also makes him butt heads with his original version when they bring him over to help defeat the blood-soaked Man of Steel. And at 8, Spider-Man. Okay, technically this is Spider-Man, but it's a zombie version of Spider-Man. I'm gonna count it anyway because this is freaking messed up, zombie or not. On Earth 2149, an alien plague ends up infecting all superpowered individuals and turns them into zombies. However, it's later revealed that the Necronomicon from Evil Dead was actually what caused it. But after learning that the plague was really bad, Peter ran home to get Aunt May and MJ the hell out of Dodge. Understandably. But when he gets there, we get a good old case of protagonist syndrome and boom, zombie spider. He ends up becoming a zombie right then and there, and then eats the 2 most important people in his life. He also has a fractured jaw before becoming a zombie, so I'm sure that you can imagine that this isn't a pretty sight, even by zombie standards, okay? It may not be our Pete, but it was a version of Spider-Man, and him turning into a zombie right as he gets home, yeah, pretty damn shocking. And at 7, Batman. When Ares, the Greek god of war, created a helmet that amplified his powers 100-fold, war broke out in an effort to stop him. For 2 years, Batman and Wonder Woman fought side by side and got close enough to attempt to stop the god. It was during this war that Bruce and Diana fell in love with each other, and they and their allies pledged to kill the god of war in order to end his reign of terror. As they finally mounted an attack to kill Ares, the two were able to get the helmet off of him. However, Diana was incapacitated, but Batman thought she was dead. Driven by grief of the loss of his love, Batman puts on the helmet to defeat Ares, but it's a helmet created by a god of war and not Kratos, so yeah, I'm sure that you can figure out where this is going. Despite being warned of its corrupting influence by Diana earlier on, he thought that he could wield it mercifully and make it just and use it for good. He successfully killed Ares, but was turned into a warrior who's merciless and just lost his old code because he thought it was worthless. Despite learning that Diana actually survived as well and was only stunned, Bruce was too addicted to the power of the helmet to actually let it go. He ended up choosing to kill the woman he loved rather than losing the helmet, which is just what the hell. And at 6, Hulk. Oh, here we go. Hulk, aka Maestro, in the Future Imperfect storyline, is actually the Hulk that is present in the Old Man Logan series. First appearing in the Incredible Hulk Future Imperfect #1 from 1992, Maestro possesses Bruce Banner's intellect and the Hulk's more evil personality traits. Monstrous personality traits. After a devastating nuclear war destroyed the majority of the human race, the radiation from that war was actually absorbed into Hulk, basically supercharging him, turning him into an even more powerful version that isn't Claw. Like, he doesn't have to get angrier to become more powerful, he just now is because he absorbed all that damn radiation. Then he ended up creating the Hulk gang with She-Hulk forcefully. I can't really get into it. I'm sure that you can understand where I'm going with this, but YouTube's gonna get mad if I explain it any further, but it's still freaking terrifying, okay? The Hulk is already a monster, and then add on to that more radiation, and then the destruction of a country and the world, and then yeah. Also, this was 1992. They did this in 1992. Halfway through, into number 5, Robin. Robin is a prominent character in Batman's crime-fighting endeavors, okay? He's the loyal sidekick and partner in crime, or I guess partner in anti-crime, his battle against justice in Gotham. Over the years, there also have been 5 individuals who have taken up the mantle of Robin because they just keep on dying. The first Robin was Dick Grayson, a young acrobat who eventually goes on to become Nightwing before assuming assuming the role of Batman himself. Jason Todd, the second Robin, was a troubled orphan who found solace and purpose under Batman's guidance until his untimely death at the hands of the Joker, who was later resurrected as the Red Hood and embarked on a more ruthless path, starting off as a villain and then becoming an anti-hero vigilante character that is willing to kill, but it isn't. And I mean, like, we were all surprised at the reveal, alright, we were, because let's be honest, we thought that he was dead. Him coming back is kind of what started the whole, oh yeah, characters are gonna keep coming back thing, and you can't really kill them because, I mean, if you do, where are you gonna keep making your money? People being creative and coming up with new heroes regularly? You're funny. In at 4, Scarlet Witch. Considering how the entirety of House of M is about how Wanda changed reality, I think it's fairly safe to say that she's a powerful person, okay? Even if she didn't start out as a hero, like in Multiverse of Madness or in the MCU. Like, she was somehow able to send demons and monsters across different dimensions to attack America Chavez, but couldn't just go to those dimensions herself. She was able to take on the Illuminati in that universe and beat them all down, easily proving that she's not only an extremely powerful mutant, but no matter what side she's on, the other person's gonna lose. The only limit to Wanda's abilities is her brain. I feel like after all of, like, you know, her arc and then having to kill Vision even though you weren't really killing him because he's just a robot and blah blah blah, I feel like her becoming a villain was kind of surprising, but also every time she becomes a villain after being a hero, it's kind of surprising, but I guess it's kind of not at this point because we expect it. But hey, look, when she rewrote reality, I'm sure you were surprised. I feel like you should have been. Getting close to the end in number 3, Green Lantern. I think this point is justified thanks to Emerald Twilight from back in 1994. The story begins with Hal Jordan holding a doll in the middle of what was once Coast City. Grief-stricken, he recreates the city using his power ring, including its deceased inhabitants and his father. Somehow, I don't know how you can recreate people with the power of will, but okay. Which violated the Green Lantern Corps code, which forbids lanterns from using their powers for personal gain. And then he gets reprimanded for it, but this makes him even madder. So Hal drains the holographic projection's energy and travels to O to use the central power battery to permanently reconstruct Coast City. And then the Guardians send other Green Lanterns to stop him, but of course, he's the freaking protagonist, he wipes them all out. As Hal's rampage continues, the consequences of his actions ripple throughout the cosmos, with Green Lanterns vanishing and their rings inexplicably disappearing. Even Guy Gardner, who wears Sinestro's yellow ring, witnessed the devastation caused by Hal's actions, and then, you know, he starts calling himself Parallax, and it gets all freaky. But ultimately, in number 2, Green Arrow. Haha, yes, even billionaires who love archery can still be evil. Shocking! Billionaires being evil? In Green Arrow number 7, published in February of 2011, Ollie faced off with the Lady of the Forest, a mysterious entity that appeared in Star City's new forest. It grew there after Prometheus had blown up Star City into, ironically enough, a star-shaped crater, which is the topic of how he turned evil. Because after doing this, and after watching Roy lose his arm, after watching Roy's daughter Leanne die in that explosion, Oliver went and shot Prometheus right in the dome. He turned evil because we had to deal with the Trial of Green Arrow storyline, which is, from what I've seen, the most hated Green Arrow comic storyline ever. And finally, in at number 1, The Flash. In an alternate future, a version of Barry Allen, also known as The Flash, blames himself for the death of Wally West and became determined to prevent it from happening. He started by killing his enemies and using these actions to somehow increase his speed so that he could travel back in time to fix his mistake. While the actual current version of Flash was busy dealing with a rockslide in Pakistan, Future Flash arrived to confront Daniel West and prevent Wally's death. During their battle, Future Flash explained the tragic consequences that would result from Reverse Flash's actions, and fueled by rage, Future Flash rips off Daniel's head just in time to prevent the accident that would have killed Wally. Flash rips off someone's head. The Flash then confronted his future self for this act of, murder, but was crippled by him because crippling your past self isn't going to have any consequences when you're traveling through time. But a newly costumed Wally West shows up as like the new Flash to stop the Future Flash, and then Paradox things, the Speed Force tears open, he tries to seal it, and then the Future Flash becomes the current Flash. It's a whole thing, but yeah, Barry Allen going on a killing spree of all of his worst foes, yeah, that's shocking.